Hello, my name is Mike Bickle, and I'm here to talk about my literature review on one-to-one technology implementation for Concordia University, St. Paul. So the essential question for our class is, in light of what is known about how children learn in education policy and practice, how shall educators best teach, utilize, and implement technology to enhance student achievement? And this led me to my research question, which is, how does a one-to-one implementation affect student achievement in regards to test scores in their core subjects, and what structures make teaching using technology most effective? The reason for this topic for me was that being at the middle school I'm at, I've been there at the start of the one-to-one implementation process. Now have kind of seen it all the way to where we are several years later, and really am curious as to how successful it is. Our districts also had a huge push for literacy through strategies such as those you can find in Avid and other reading programs, and looking at is doing things on paper and interacting with text more important for literacy than using technology. So this also led me to wanting to find evidence to support the one-to-one overall student performance increase, and then also what makes a one-to-one implementation successful. Uh, so the keys to increased test scores seem to be tied to the structures put in place by the schools and the district, from what I've found. So my first source was a quantitative study that was looking at what makes a one-to-one implementation program successful to teachers. So they went through and surveyed several hundred teachers, came down to 75 that were selected from various schools and asked to rate topics such as efficacy, infrastructure, attitudes, and technology use. This research for me found that the teachers who had a technology facilitator in their schools were more comfortable and better suited to use technology in their classrooms. And this was partly why I wanted to look at what districts put in place, what infrastructure or people they put in place to help make technology successful. And it sounded like the technology facilitator was the number one factor for the schools that these 75 teachers were in. A second source was a qualitative study on superintendents who have brought their districts through a one-to-one implementation. It started with about 30 different superintendents that they were talked to in Iowa, and then narrowed it down to 8 who had been there from before implementation all the way through afterward to show what it was like before, during, and after, and what are some of the challenges that they've faced throughout their implementations. This is important as it gave me a different perspective than just being a teacher who's been through implementation, but what the district side of things looks like, even though they're not in the classrooms using it. They're the ones coming up with ideas, setting up the process and infrastructure into what is going to make students successful and teachers successful as well. My third source was another qualitative study and focused on schools in Maine specifically, and it focused on 2 subject areas of math and writing scores. The study was helpful as it showed both sides of implementation. So it talked about schools that had done implementation and had not found that their test scores had increased, but then also had schools that were successful in increasing test scores in both math and writing, and kind of what factors go into that, why it worked in some cases, why it didn't. So it looked at one school that had failed because they just gave the students and teachers one-to-one laptops, but really didn't have anything in place as to how to best use them. And they ended up becoming more of a distraction. But then it also looked at districts that had all types of systems set up to help students and teachers both be successful, and those schools did see their test scores increase. My fourth source was a quantitative study that was done in Australia. Used a large sample size from several schools in Australia and was focused on science test scores. So this was a study where there was 2 groups of students. So it was 2 graduating groups. So one class was given laptops, the other class the following year was not given laptops. And then they were asked to go through the same science classes of chemistry, physics, and things like that all the way through their graduation year. It looked at the test scores of the students who received the laptops and then also the students who did not receive them. And it looked at how laptops had influenced the two groups and which groups were more successful, which was the students who had the laptops. But it also showed some of the limitations of almost all of these kids had internet or computers at home. So was the laptop the big difference, or is it just kind of an anomaly? And my fifth source was a qualitative study that asked teachers and principals as to what their views were on technology and education. This allowed for freedom of answers from veteran and new teachers. They mentioned that the average or the median teaching length for the teachers in this survey or study was 17 years. So you had both new teachers and veteran teachers who had been there long before one-to-one implementations and student teachers who have been trained in it. And this helped to show some of the downfalls of technology, as some of the other teachers were saying how it can hamper creativity because not everyone learns in the same ways. There's the same views on education, so that maybe technology doesn't promote learning for some students, and while technology does promote some things for other students. It was kind of an interesting take on looking outside of just the technology aspect, and a big thing they talked about was creativity, that sometimes laptops can kind of hamper some of that natural creativity, for some teachers at least, and other teachers thought it could help enhance it. So it kind of gave both sides of the argument. And here are my reference page and my 5 different sources. Thanks.